Ontario Premier Doug Ford reiterated today that he has 12 allies in his push to split up the North American Trade Pact.
It's unanimous. Every single premier agrees that Canada should directly negotiate separate bilateral free trade agreements with the U.S. and Mexico and return fairness to free trade.
Ford said the premiers came to this consensus on a group call yesterday, but afterwards, Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Andrew Furey clarified this isn't a call to scrap the trade deal completely or immediately.
The consensus was, and the concept was, that should the old agreement fail, we would be interested in supporting two separate bilateral agreements.
Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that the possibility of negotiating two separate deals is on the table should the government need to.
We will fight for Canadians. We will secure Canadian jobs and Canadian growth long into the future. Ideally, we do that as a united North American market. But pending decisions and choices that Mexico has made, we may have to look at other options. But let me just say it again. My ideal situation is we continue to work well together.
Okay, let's bring back the Power Panel to talk about this. Shachi Kurl, Cameron Ahmad, Tim Powers, and Jordan Leichnitz. Tim, Doug Ford says there's a consensus. Let's start negotiating. And he said today, and my colleague Megan Fitzpatrick, I want to start doing it now. The other premiers have not said that. They have said we have to be willing to do bilateral deals, but they're not saying let's start negotiations with the U.S. right now and tear up CUSMA.
And somewhere Donald Trump has a feed of Doug Ford doing this, and Ontario's going to be first and win. Premier Ford also planning for an election. It's not unwise in some ways for his own interests, some of the posturing that he's doing. He made a lot last week of the deal they'd done with Starlink, which is owned by Elon Musk. And of course, Elon is involved with the Trump regime. So this is about his own posturing around protecting Ontario. I don't know if we'll ever get to a place where the premiers are driving the international trade agreements. Let's be clear, that's going to be driven by Donald Trump and whoever the Canadian Prime Minister is first and foremost. They can say what they want to say, but I think most of the premiers, because we do so much work with the United States and trade with the U.S., want to send a message themselves that, hey, Trump, we hear you. We may not be fully on side with you, but we're not offside either.
Right.
And that's probably good economic political messaging for now.
But Doug Ford, Tim, just to follow up, saying this is the unanimous position of Canada's premiers and the Council of the Federation, without a statement from the Council saying this, and with other premiers publicly and other provinces privately in phone calls with me saying that's not what we agreed to. That this went out on the Associated Press wire.
Have you ever known?
No, but this went on the Associated Press wire. This has gone out to the world.
And I'm sure Doug Ford is not unhappy about that. His colleagues may be. It's not unusual for Doug Ford, or other premiers for that matter, to overstate things.
Right.
I'm not sure Doug Ford is going to get calls from the other premiers saying, we wish you didn't do that. It may be of benefit to them. We'll see.
Jordan, I don't know. He's saying all the premiers are united in cutting Mexico out right now is a big statement, and no other premier has said this in front of a microphone, and there's no news release on it, and others say, that ain't what we said.
Well, yeah, and if that's not what they said, they're going to have to come out and clarify that. But Premier Ford coming in hot is not exactly unexpected, I think, for exactly the reasons that Tim outlined. This is about positioning him for the election that is going to be coming up very quickly in Ontario. And it's also about sending some signals of strength, right? And really trying to separate Ontario from the pack, if you will, within Canada. Now, look, I think maybe this is where we end up. Maybe we end up with separate agreements with Mexico and the United States at the end of a longer process. But to me, it would seem foolish to start there.
Well, yeah. Yes.
And so I think the federal government, obviously is going to have a bit more of a nuance on this, regardless of who's prime minister.
So, Cameron, this is what I'm wondering about, right? Like, the review process doesn't even start until 2026. And you need to figure out exactly how Trump doesn't even have his cabinet picked, but like how the tariffs get applied and how Canada and Mexico fit into that, and if they are affected by it or not, and what exactly the incoming president wants to do with the trade agreement. So like making this big, bold position now and lumping the other premiers in with it, what does that do to strengthen Canada's position going into things with the U.S.?
Great question. I mean, they have to be very careful about this. And I think if ever there's a moment for the premiers to, pause on the posturing, working with Trump White House 2.0 would be a moment to do that, and being very deliberate about being in lockstep, not only with each other, but with the federal government, and having some of these conversations behind closed doors. There will be moments to show strength and maybe even posture, but that has to be part of a strategy. I mean, the reason that that Canada was able to come through with a successful trade renegotiation with Trump 1.0 White House was because there was an enormous amount of attention to tact and detail and strategy, and doing so together and establishing a cross-partisan, multi-sectoral Team Canada approach. So any veering from that is potentially dangerous, unhelpful. They just have to be careful about it. And this is not something that I think is worth freelancing on for the good of the country. That said, the concerns about Chinese imports to Mexico are real. The Prime Minister has spoken about them, and he said he conveyed that to the Mexican government. So, let's try and work that out before talking about just opining about hypothetical bilateral deals.
Yeah, and there is a new Mexican government, and who knows, right? Like what the new president may want to do there. Shachi, your thoughts on all of this? What do you make of it?
Well, first of all, Canadians do tend to look at Mexico as a valued trade partner and ally when we've done polling on this. Certainly maybe not as valued or respected as that Canada-U.S. trade relationship. So, hey, if you've got to make Sophie's choice, probably the Canadian public is going to, have to go all in terms of their sentiments. They'll be more likely to say, look, if we've got to save one, we're going to want to save that relationship with the United States rather than Mexico. But also, how did we get here? Beyond the pre-posturing of Doug Ford, which, okay, important to talk about the Chinese imports aspect, important to set himself apart. And if any one province and any premier has more to lose by what we are seeing with the specter of those Chinese imports coming through Mexico, it is Doug Ford with the auto sector, more than it affects, say, Alberta or Saskatchewan or other provinces. That said, let's think maybe about the retaliatory position that Mexico might be in. I think it's important for people to remember that it's a $40 billion plus trade relationship going back and forth between between Canada and Mexico. And indeed, 4.5 million Canadians visit Mexico every year without having to apply for a visa. So all of those cold Canadians who are looking to get out of cyclone bomb weather and get out of the rain, get out of the wind, including yours truly at the moment, and looking for ways to maybe get some sunshine. Those are things that Mexico is also in. Mexico City and the government there are going to say, look, if you keep talking too much about this, there are things that they can do to make the lives of a lot of snowbirds and Canadians just looking for some sun and some surf quite difficult. And that will get the attention of MPPs in Ontario and MPs across the country faster than any of the other policy talks that we're going to have in regards to what Mexico may or may not be sending across the border in terms of goods and or services.
Tim, you can understand Doug Ford's anxiety to protect the auto sector, right, and not have anything disrupted by this, but he wants to talk about Mexico. Donald Trump may want to talk about the digital service tax, may want to talk about supply management, dairy in particular. Like he has, put a willingness to drop Mexico on the table right away when he's not even the negotiator, and we don't even know what's coming from the United States yet.
Right, all valid points. But again, look, as they were styled, Trump 2.0, right? This is a lot of heated rhetoric from there, a lot of boom, boom, boom. It's simple talk, and Ford is magnifying that in terms of his own mannerisms. We learned today? We have a new incoming U.S. ambassador who's from Michigan, and he probably, who was a congressman in Michigan, connected to Donald Trump. I'm sure that, Ford is not unhappy that that gentleman is hearing that particular language so he can get fed back. I mean, he's positioning himself, too, as the voice, as he's the head of the Council of Federations right now, but I'm sure he's thinking, and his team is thinking, all right, Donald Trump ever looks east, and he knows the Prime Minister already, whether the Prime Minister will be there when we get to it or not, he wants to find somebody he can relate to. Well, Doug Ford wants to be that person. So there's some personal political positioning that's happening here, and that's reflected in his language.
Do you think this helps Doug Ford in the election that we all believe he will call sometime before the April 1 checks come out from Justin Trudeau's government?
Yes, between the two checks
Between the two
at some
checks,
point.
yeah.
Yeah, look, I think it does. I think that Canadians, and particularly those who make their livings in and around the manufacturing sector, have a great deal of anxiety about what's to come from this Trump administration. There was really no evidence to suggest that Trump believes that Canada and the United States have a special relationship. And so the idea that we would get some sort of special treatment in those negotiations, I think, is one that can't be counted on. And so I think there is a political bonus to be had for politicians who are able to position themselves as fighting for Canadians' jobs, as defending Canadian industries in the face of this new uncertainty and this protectionism that we're seeing from the United States. So he's trying to grab that bonus. Of course, he doesn't have the burden of actually having to negotiate those things.
No.
So it's much easier for him to come out with that strong, plain language that Tim was talking about and put these things on the table because he doesn't have to close those deals.
Okay, so Shachi, we lost Cameron again. Shachi, what do you think the federal government should do here? Is it useful for them to have a guy like Doug Ford out there disrupting things and being bombastic and playing bad cop? Or is it disruptive for them to have him out there throwing out ideas that may not align with their negotiating strategy and objectives?
It probably didn't hurt, David, to have those points that Doug Ford has made early on out there and not have the PMO or Global Affairs have to make those points. So, yeah, hey, great. Thanks, Doug. Winky, winky, nudgy, nudgy. However, at some point, we're talking about this more than we are talking about what the Trudeau government would like us to be talking about, which is that they have a plan and they have a mature, solid, seasoned, expert plan to get through NAFTA, what will now be NAFTA 3.0. And so I think it worked, or it could have been useful to a point. It was important to put it out there. Doug Ford may have been a useful proxy. I don't think he's doing it to do Justin Trudeau and his government any favors, but it probably didn't hurt. Now, to your point, the fact that this is being portrayed as something that all 10 premiers and 3 territorial leaders are in lockstep on, when I guarantee you that many of them are going, huh, what? No. This is now a situation where it runs the risk once again of becoming a distraction. And if the Liberal government has been plagued by nothing over the last many, many years, it is own goals and distractions, or getting pulled into talking about things that they would rather not be talking about. And we're going to get to a point where that starts to become this.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. We lost Cameron. We cut him out like Mexico. I'm pulling the Doug Ford here.
It wasn't on purpose.
Yeah, no. And I don't know if we had unanimity, but I'm going to say we did. Shachi Curl, Cameron, if you're watching, Tim Powers, Jordan Likeness, thanks so much for being here.